My name is Ricardo Pereira. I'm the president of the Mozambique Association for Renewable Energies, and I will be the moderator for the event. Right now, I do have the pleasure of inviting the ALER president and member of the board of AMER, Dr. Miquelina, Menezes, please.
Muito obrigada, Ricardo.
Thank you very much, Ricardo.
Pela introdução.
Thank you
Como foi dito,
for your kind words.
da ALER,
I am ALER's president, as you said, and I'm a member of AMER's board.
e queria fazer uma pequena introdução.
I would just like to give a brief introduction
Da cooperação da delegação da
at
União
Honorable
Doutora Isabel Almeida, excelentíssimo senhor chefe da cooperação da Embaixada Alemã,
Head of Cooperation with the European Delegation in Mozambique, Dr. Isabel Almeida, Right Honorable Head of Cooperation for the German Embassy in Mozambique, Thierry Kühn. I'm not sure if Mr. Said from FUNAE is here, but distinguished speakers, distinguished guests. You've all come to this webinar, which is going to go over the new regulation for energy access in off-grid areas in Mozambique. So ALER and AMER have put together this webinar with the support of ARENE and FUNAE. We do have speakers like Dr. Tel and Dr. Isália. I think Dr. Said is not able to join us today, but for us, this regulation is of the utmost importance, and we would like to congratulate ARENE for the very timely publishing of this regulation. Why? Because this will help us implement off-grid projects, and it will help us to define the shape of how off-grid actors will be able to implement their projects. This means that not only EDM and FUNAE will be able to implement energy for all and make sure that until 2030, everybody will have access to energy and electricity, but also make way for the private sector to come in. This is a very important, it's a watermark event for the Mozambique society, a key event here for all the Mozambicans, because energy equals development in education, in health, in gender equality. It's a giant leap so that we can all have access to energy to 2030. This was one of our goals, one of the goals of our President of the Republic, when he set forward and he set out these goals in the State of the Union speech. So more development and more active participation from the private sector. So that is why ALER and AMER are available to provide all support necessary in order to make sure that this regulation and future ones are debated, are well known, and allow for the companies and organizations to also step in and participate in this huge project. I'm not going to take the floor here for too long. I think the best is yet to come. So if you allow me, I'll give back the floor to Ricardo so that he can then give the floor to all the other speakers. Thank you very much for your presence here. Thank you for participating
Espero
in
que
this
você vá, tenha
event
muitas
organized by ALER and AMER,
expectativas
and I
boas.
think it
Muito
will
obrigado e boa sessão, que seja bastante
it will
participativa. Muito obrigada a todos.
it will meet your expectations. Thank you very much, everybody. Thank you, Dr. Miquelina. I think it's a very good kickoff. And Mozambique is also looking at this regulation very closely. Without further ado, I would also like to give the floor to our next speaker, Thierry Kühn. I hope I mispronounce your name, Head of Cooperation for the German Embassy. Thierry, welcome. Thank you very much, Ricardo. Good morning, everybody. So, I am the thank you very much. Dr. Miquelina, ladies and gentlemen, we're here today to discuss the new regulation for energy access in off-grid areas in Mozambique. This initiative tries to showcase the progress of all the efforts put forward by the country in the last couple of years, bringing about very clear conditions to stimulate business and investment in private sector and in the renewable energy market. In this context, I would like to congratulate ALER and AMER for putting together this event, which seeks to showcase and discuss the new regulation for energy access in off-grid areas. This type of instrument is now broadly used in several markets in a way to bring about new rules and clear procedures for investors in the sector. We do believe that the time has come for the national private and international private companies invest in renewable energies in the Mozambican rural areas, thus having a little bit better trust in energy flows and less volatility in costs. This new regulation is an important goal, national goals until 2030, and also in keeping with the Sustainable Development Goal number 7 and the Paris Climate Accords. Just to quote a couple of examples, this regulation will promote private investment in projects and business models that allow for off-grid energy access, most notably mini grids and domestic solar systems. However, this also brings about a great opportunity for companies and investors in Mozambique, especially for those who promote decentralized solutions in the area of renewable energies, particularly in areas with no electric grid. Germany cooperation has been supporting the energy sector for more than 20 years. In 2020, we came with to an agreement with the Mozambique government, and we are now currently financing 10 projects to the tune of 180 million euros. The projects are being implemented by GES and the German Development Bank, KfW. The main feature of our work is renewable energies generation, access to energy as well as transmission and grid reinforcement or enhancement. So we want to include the private sector in the energy transition and energy access. Our German financial cooperation in 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 a joint effort with KfW has been working the segment with different programs like GetFit and Green People's Energy. We have other programs with NDEV and Green People's Energy, the result based fund phaser, and also Get Transform and Get Invest from the Get Pro platform. These are different type of programs, and the European Union is co-financing 3 of these programs that are part of the Promote Energy. It is also important to stress that we have the support of the Get Invest program. In events like this one in partnership with ALER AMER. Get.invest now seeking to promote an investment in projects in private and also in private endeavors with decentralized renewable energy solutions. The German corporation believes that only with a sound regulatory instrument you will be able to have competition with an innovating private sector. Also, always fine-tuning or in tune with what the government is trying to do. Universal access to energy can only be achieved if you have hand-in-hand cooperation with all the partners, with all the engaged partners, and a very transparent framework, regulatory framework. So we'll be looking forward, very much forward, with high hopes to see the outcome of this instrument and the new electricity law that should balance very carefully the public and private interests. So just to come to an end here, we're very proud to stand side by side with the European Union and with the Mozambique government in this task that seeks to make sure and make possible that all the Mozambicans have access to energy till 2030. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Thierry Kühn. Thank you very much for your presentation. We do have some very interesting notes here after your speech. Most notably, we do have a better understanding how the German cooperation impacts the energy sector. 70 million just in financing for this sector, including technical assistance. So now I would like to welcome the head of cooperation for the EU delegation in Mozambique, Isabel Faria Almeida. Welcome, and maybe you can have your presentation now. Thank you very much.
Ok, muito bom dia. Consegue ouvir-me? Ok.
Good morning, can you hear me? Yes, loud and clear. All right. I will speak in Portuguese now.
Excelentíssimos representantes do Ministério dos Recursos Minerais e da Energia.
Right, honorable representatives of the Ministry of Mineral Resources and Energy, ARENE and FUNAE, distinguished colleagues from the German Embassy and other partners, development partners, dear representatives of the private sector, members of AMER and ALER, distinguished participants, ladies and gentlemen. Although we have been witnessing recent improvements, the national electrification rate is still under 40% of the total population in Mozambique, with staggering gaps in between the urban rate, approximately 73%, and the rural area rate, more or less 5%. So this challenge of electrifying the rural areas is huge in Mozambique, since 2/3 of people do live in scattered communities and off the grid. the Mozambican government, as you know, is committed to in achieving the universal access to electricity until 2030, and in 2019, it published the National Program of Energy for All, and it did publish this as a coordinated national plan. We cannot achieve this only with by being connected to the grid. We do have to have a mix of several things, extending and making the grid more consistent, and also bringing in off-the-grid solutions like mini-grids and autonomous systems, so-called domestic solar systems. So if we want to have access to energy for everybody until 2030, the national strategy for electrification does set out that 70% of all the households will be at the time connected to the grid, and that 30% will rely on off-the-grid energy. The off-the-grid roadmap put forward by FUNAE in December 2021 sets out the national values, and it also sets out the percentage, the distribution percentage between the mini grids and the autonomous systems for the off-the-grid segment. However, we do have to stress that in the so-called deep rural communities, further in the outermost deep rural communities, the off-the-grid solar systems will be, especially the autonomous ones, will be the main source of electrification until 2030. So in order to reach these very ambitious goals and to promote investments in electrification off the grid, it is of paramount importance that Mozambique puts forward a legal and regulatory framework, a proper one, so that it can attract private investment, very much needed to face this challenge, and to also make possible the best quality and the best prices for the entire population when it comes to energy services. The amount of investment needed here is enormous, and the public sector and donors alone cannot achieve this. So it is key to have private investors here, and that is why that this new decree that we're here debating today is of paramount importance. I would like, first and foremost, to congratulate the Mozambique government and most notably ARENE for having consulted with the private sector and its partners and the development partners before adopting this decree in December last year. This is a very good example of co-creation, as it were. Several development partners are already very active in electrifying off the grid and trying to give FUNAE and private sector pioneers some support. The EU, along with Germany, is incentivizing the private sector, giving solar kits to families that live in outermost regions or rural areas there. This has been very important, especially throughout the pandemic, in trying to keep the market afloat. The EU also helps FUNAE in developing norms for the or guidelines and standards rather for the construction and for the upkeeping of the mini grids. Also, we have provided important financial support to SolarWorks, for instance, the EU, alongside the European Investment Bank. We also have the GET.invest window in Mozambique. So we are now getting the private sector and the local financial institutions ready so that they can now take part completely in this process. Italy and Belgium are also important partners when it comes to developing these mini grids. We do hope that this regulation will provide a new dimension to the off-grid dimension in Mozambique, a program like the sorts of Shrine in the United Kingdom, or Beyond the Grid Fund for Africa from Sweden, or the Green People's Energy from Germany. Those will be paramount and key programs in the forthcoming years. This financing initiative from the EU will soon make available loans and loan capital to the companies that are willing to invest in the off-grid electrification. These programs will then be looking at these in more detail throughout the different sessions today. Today's conference will possible not just to have a better understanding of the renewable opportunities, but also to see more clearly the next stages as we need to go to apply this great. We will have to have additional regulation to have further clarity on rules to some key aspects of the important tariff issue will have to be fully detailed so that we can have the success and the great uptake of like to projects like the mini group scale project. Yes, to be accessible to the population. It also needs to allow the countries of early investment and functioning of these grids. So the EU is supporting the GET transfer program when it comes to the rules of adopting and setting out the prices for the tariffs, and those rules will be later published in additional regulation. The way this is going to be implemented, the institutional organization, and who does what, everything will need to be here today as well. I think that all hope that this additional regulation will be approved and that the new rules will be implemented soon, so that new projects, off-grid projects, can flourish. It would be a shame if such a key element, key point here when it comes to granting universal access to energy would be hampered because of an inefficient implementation of the regulation. So I would like to thank ALER and ARENE for putting this together in partnership with GET.invest. I'm sure that we all will benefit a lot from the debate today. I wish you a very interesting and productive conference today. Thank you very much for your attention. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Isabel, thank you for your speech and your words. I took notes, you brought up some very important issues. And I'm sure it will help spark some of the debate that we'll have. The fact that you highlighted the huge challenge for us. It's 60% of the population in Mozambique that have no access to electrical power. This means we have a mountain to climb. However, I'd like to point out that out of all the other things that you mentioned, I'd like to stress the tools that we need to climb the mountain. From the support that we're getting, I'd like to stress this. This COVID-19 pandemic that we've been experiencing since February 2020, so nearly 2 years now. And now we're starting to see the beginnings of something as normal. But this is just the hardships of living in a world that is a globalized world. But we need to have the ability to develop some sort of local. Some of the partners mentioned here, GIZ, German Corporation, European Union. We saw them adapt and be very flexible and come up with programs to support companies and support sectors during the COVID-19 pandemic. We're also pleased to note that all of these programs and one of the best in the sector, like we come to Mozambique and can help play a role in our scaling up. Lastly, I'd like to say that There's no great hurdle lacking a structure, or regulation, or a regulatory framework that is appropriate. But we've taken the first step, so I'd like to, on behalf of AMER and ALER, thank FUNAE and all the other authorities. Isabel said that this is a vision, there's a business part. We'll discuss the rates, but we must learn how to walk before we learn how to walk and run. But we are taking steps in order to learn how to crawl. We'll move on to the optimum later on running. We had expected to have here Deputy Director Miquelina, the Deputy Director for Ministry of Energy and Mineral Resources. She was expected to be here, but unfortunately, and much to our regret, due to technical issues, she will not be able to be here by the National Delegation for Energy. Will take the floor towards the end of the event. And since the government of Mozambique, it would be very important for us to have them here in the opening session. But barring that, we'll be able to have them here at the end of the event. And now that this opening session has come to an end, I'd like to ask Dr. Telma Matavel Nkutuluma, the head of consumer support for ARENE, for the energy regulator. Telma, thank you so much for being here with us today. Welcome. Please, you may launch your presentation. Good morning, everyone. Thank you, Ricardo. Firstly, I'd like to greet all participants, and especially panel speakers. I'd like to especially thank Germany, the European Union, and others. There are far too many to mention all by name. We count on your support. ARENE, support for government, draft after the document will I'll present to you. Generally speaking, I'll present the main aspects for this project for access to off-grid areas in Mozambique. We say that to carry out this assignment, we counted on BRILHO. They're still working with that in drafting the complementary framework, as has been said. The regulation at stake here has been recently approved by BRILHO 93 of 2021. It's a part of the reform of the legal framework for the electrical sector in Mozambique. Generally speaking, a lot has been said, but I'd like to stress how much this regulation contributes towards the right to access to power. We know that rural areas are the ones that stand to benefit the most. I'm very glad to have all the private sector actors here today. This will help give a little boost to spreading electrical power to the rural areas without ever neglecting the fact that the regulation is aligned with the Sustainable Development Goals, especially Goal 7. On this chart, you can see the pillars of the electrification strategy. We have the grid, but also the off-grid. And it's important to point this out. We're trying to bring electricity to the rural areas. We have two main vectors. The single hole solar system and mini grids. When it comes to the concept of the regulations, mini grids, they have a capacity of up to 10 megawatts. And for the purpose of implementing this regulation and electrifying the areas, the government decided to approve an electrification plan for these areas. We have this electrification plan, of course, but for off-grid areas, we also need those, and that's going to be our North Star. We need to identify which area will be electrified, and then we'll award permits. First, there will be procurement processes, but also interested parties can make applications. This public procurement procedure has certain specificities. If there are some provisions, if there's public interest or a majority participation of a public body, the license will be awarded for a period of 30 years. There are several categories, 3 categories. The first category is from 1 to 10 megawatts. The second category is 150 kilowatts on 1 megawatt, and the third one is up to 150 kilowatts. At the smaller capacity, the more simple are the procedures for awarding this license, and includes simplified licensing contracts. Another thing that I'd like to mention is that the Category 3 projects will benefit from not requiring a license for establishing and operating the facility. There are certain deadlines, there are communication procedures, and we need to adopt the technologies to the reality. This license is valid for a single area, but there may be licenses that include several areas. The ministry will have to review and approve the criteria for technical, legal, and financial eligibility, and ARENE will do the prior check of these prerequisites, and afterwards we will run this procurement procedure. Something else that I think is important is to talk about the performance assurance for a maximum of 5% of the investment amount. The regulation also talks about competing application, and while we're processing an application, another application may be made, and at that point, and based on some specific criteria and procedures to define, will then launch competition and will award the license to the one with the best technical and financial assurance. FUNAE has a very important role, and its role is aligned with its usual role and it's the promotion of the projects in off-grid areas and the collections and collation of data for the energy record. Some of the duties of the applicant. You need to report to ARENE their activities. The licensee, after they get their license, I mean, they need to report where the project will be launched, its size, category, and how complex it is. This is all being still lined up. Then they will need to detail the improvement that they can do on the energy record and how they can help evolve the access to energy in off-grid areas. They have 18 months to begin construction, and there's 48 months for water power and 36 months for other sources of power to launch or to begin commercial operation. ARENE will have the chance to regulate everything. After all that's been said, I know there are certainly many outstanding questions. We talked about several aspects, but some of them are not detailed yet. This is the general framework. In red is the regulation, and then the regulation will go into detail. There will be sub-regulations or additional regulations. There will be the tariffs, the costs, the rates. There will be interlinking the quality of services, commercial services, technical and safety and tax issues. All of this is now being thought out and is now being planned and drafted. There is the regulation, and now ARENE and FUNAE and the government are working on all the other sub-regulations that will help implement the main regulations. Another important vector to access energy are energy services. Energy services can be residential, solar services, or other sources of power. Anyone interested in providing these services needs to register with ARENE, and they'll receive a certification valid for 5 years. The provider of these services has rights, but also duties. They need to comply with the solid waste regulation. The environmental issues are also very important, considering all the experiences we've had. And discarding these materials, batteries, etc., and whatnot, need to be done in a way so as to preserve the environment. So we need energy, but not at the cost of destroying the environment. They must also follow the quality rules when it comes to equipment, but also in the way it provides services to the state. They need also to report and to report information and record it into the energy register. But the record has a validity of 5 years, and it can be cancelled as well. The regulation, pursuant to the regulation, there will be regulatory tax to be paid. ARENE will define all the terms and conditions for this tax, for this fee. So there's no license fee. There's only the regulation fee or this tax. there may be tax benefits, but in order to get those tax benefits, you'll need to show that you have the right, that you have a permission to conduct this activity. ARENE will then monitor everything, and the conflict resolution mechanism will be the ARENE, and even, if the case warrants it, international arbitration. It's important to point out that all applicants and all licensees must at all times comply with all laws and regulations and have all the permits and licenses required to provide their services. Right now, like I said, we're going into the minutiae and we're drafting the detailed sub-regulations. We're talking to the partners, we're talking to the participants, to the beneficiaries, and we're talking with the European unions, and we're talking about the rates, about some very specific things. Before the regulation was approved, we went through a very long and arduous consultation procedure, and I hope that ALER AMER and all other interested parties can see their concerns reflected in what we've done, and we need to consider all the balance that we need. We need to bring power to the rural areas. We also need to drive development, never forgetting how crucial the private sector is. Thank you very much, Ricardo. You have the floor now. Thank you so much. This was a wonderful presentation. And I think that if we were all in a room, you'd be getting a standing applause, because this work was clearly amazing. I think it's very important to stress for everyone who's had the opportunity to read the regulation, and the regulation has been published. If you've not read the regulation yet, AMER and ALER have the regulation, and we can send it to you. Just ask. So I'd like to stress that as you read the regulation and as you realize the steps that have been taken, and we see a transition towards a more competitive approach. So ARENE will launch the procurement competitions. And we see the competitiveness, and we see that with public tenders, there is more transparency, and this is very good. This is essential. We've never seen this explained in this complete a fashion ever before. So again, thank you for your presentation. Without further ado, I'd like to invite the Energy Fund, Isália Dimene, Quality and Environment Manager for FUNAE. Isália, you may have the floor now. Thank you, Ricardo. Good afternoon, everyone. I'd like to especially greet the participants and greet especially ALER and AMER for inviting FUNAE to take part in this discussion on the new regulation for access to power in off-grid areas. First of all, I'd like to stress that FUNAE is the body that will coordinate the off-grid activities. And this coordination is done in a partnership with the ministry and ALER, as mentioned already by speakers that have made use of the floor. The private sector is the main actor in implementing this regulation because there are several tools in this regulation. We have the roadbook for off-grid electrification, and this is still a draft, but it gives us an idea of the standards or some patterns that we should follow in order to have off-grid electricity. We have an electrification plan, and this plan allows us to see the models and how this issue of off-grid electricity will be managed. Because we have this approach of off-grid electrification, and the private sector has many doubts about the rates, how to safeguard the investments of the private sector, etc. And so this regulation will allow the private sector to have more security. I'd also like to point out that in the scope of off-grid electrification, we have two approaches: residential solar systems, and the private resident has a key role in ensuring increased access to power in areas that are not covered by the main grid. And then we have the mini grids. And the representatives and what they want to do, what their prospects are within the regulated framework. And another prong is within the electrification plan, there will be a public tender, and then there are opportunities for the private sector to decide to intervene in specific areas that are of their interest. Generally speaking, we'd like to say that FUNAE is open to the private sector, and I'd like to say that we've been talking to several actors of the private sector, and they're telling us what their expectations are. This document is still does not have all the final details, but the train has already left the station. So the private sector is now being called upon to tell us what their ideas, what their desires, what their hopes are, so that when finally all the instruments are approved, everything can be duly implemented where it should be. I'd like to also stress that these initiatives are in line with partner programs. There are several programs ongoing. So I'd like to thank the partners for being available and help us plan the development of off-grid activities. In short, this is what we wanted to tell you today, and mostly we wanted to call upon the private sector to provide some options. Some of the tools are already finished, some are still being developed, but I'd like to stress that we need the private sector to take part in bringing electricity to off-grid areas on our way to 2030. Thank you so much. Thank you very much, Isália. Thank you for mentioning the private sector. We have more than 100 participants. I'd like to give the floor to Rita Marouço, project manager for ALER, and she will summarize the programs for energy access in off-grid areas. Rita, go ahead.
Good morning, welcome to you. Unfortunately, we cannot hear Rita that well, a bit of a choppy sound. Now it's a bit better now. So the goal for 2030, energy for all, that's the goal. So 100% of the Mozambican population will have access to electricity. Two ways to achieve this: 70% through the national electric grid managed by EDM, and 30% from off-the-grid systems. Dr. Telma has previously mentioned this. We can have mini grid systems, or we can have the domestic solar systems, for instance. So, or the clean kitchen, it's another example. So mini grids that already are working right now, or are in construction, and being supported by FUNAE as well. So this map here lays out a little bit an overview of all the functioning centrals as we speak. 10 are being built right now, more than 50 are working. And some of them are using solar photovoltaic systems as well. So household systems. Now we do have here an overview of the private companies that already sell these type of services. I'm not going to look into this in detail. We'll make this available to you on the events page, and also in the framework of the Mozambique Renewable Project for 2022. Also worth mentioning when it comes to these private sector investors, they have been in the market since 2016. Some of them just as recently as 2020. We have an overview here of all the units installed in the country, and we also have here future developments here. So besides domestic solar systems, also photovoltaic systems for fishermen or for fishermen associations, and cold storage facilities. Off-the-grid access programs in Mozambique. There's a wide array of cooperation agencies and development and financial institutions in Mozambique that have been supporting the development of these type of activities. How is this support? What type of it? How is it? Technical sometimes? Or financial? Loans, grants, or injecting capital in public institutions, or a mix of all of this. Now, this is available both for the government and for the private sector. Some of the programs available in Mozambique here. One of them is BRILHO, co-financed by the Foreign Commonwealth Development Office from the UK. It supports mini grids and also the domestic solar systems. It also being financed by the a Swedish organization, being implemented by SNV, and its goal is to provide 184,000 connections, connect people to energy grids. Financial support for mini grids. This type of supports come in the shape of grants. There's also different types of grants, different types of technical expertise, technical support. BRILHO specifically does come with a lot of technical support. ARENE was able to provide some help and assistance when it comes to implementing the regulation. Now, these programs are very important, not just because of the financial input, but also because of all the technical expertise and assistance they provide.
Uma em 2020 e outra em 2022, e
we-
está previsto que a cada trimestre volte a ocorrer.
We want to have calls
O programa que se encontra, neste
every
momento,
quarter
em
of
Moçambique
each year.
é o
2 have already
RERD 2,
happened,
Renováveis para o Desenvolvimento
and
Rural
a couple
fase
more
2.
are in the
É um
pipeline.
programa implementado
We
pela
also
Agência de
have
Desenvolvimento
a
belga,
renewable energy for
ENBEL,
rural development phase 2,
educação,
financed by
o
Annabelle
o
from
FUNAE.
Belgium,
Esta já é a segunda
being
fase
implemented by FUNAE. This was we are on phase 2 now
e é um programa que se concentra
for
em fornecer acesso à
rural
energia em
development.
zonas rurais, usando fontes de energias
Renewable energy for rural development. So we're trying to use here renewable energies here in rural areas.
e os locais previstos para
Mini grids here exclusively.
é na
We're planning
província de
to
Nampula, mais concretamente no Conselho Administrativo
have 5
Administrativo de Miquelina,
centrals. We in Nampula, in Wheat, in Zambezia, Alta Magana, Idugu, and Mugulama. These are the locations. And hopefully we'll have 3,500 new connections. Another program, an initiative from Sweden, beyond the Grid Fund for Africa. Main goal is to grant access to clean, reliable energies in
este projeto
rural areas mostly. In Mozambique,
implementado
this is being implemented by the Nordic Finance Cooperation Network and the Renewable Energy Efficiency Partnership REEP. So we're talking about rural areas here and out and just outside a little bit outside the urban areas in Sofala, Manica, Zambezia, and Nampula. We'll hopefully have 4,000 new connections. Another program that I would like to showcase here is the Green People's Energy for Africa and in Mozambique. This is being developed by the German ministry and the German Bank for Cooperation, being implemented by MIRAM in cooperation with FUNAE. We're talking about mini grids here. The type of support is financial grants, tariff subsidies, or financing for commercial use, and some technical assistance as well. We're talking about a program where call for tenders are going to happen in 2023. We're going to try to implement between 10 and 16 projects, more solar projects, batteries as well, total capacity of 3 megawatts, and will give rise to 7,000 new connections. Domestic solar systems, and we're still here on the Green People's Energy for Africa. The main difference here is that it's being implemented by GIZ. Type of support is result-based finance, so it's a fund phaser that covers the whole country, and we're talking about a program that is already ongoing. And as we speak, it does have more than 160 productive usages and plus 62 social infrastructures. We have another program, Energizing Development, financed by several donors, Germany, Netherlands, Norway, Switzerland, and the European Union, being implemented by the GIZ, although it's also type of support is also result-based finance on the domestic solar systems, covers the whole country, and it's already benefited 9 social infrastructures and more than 200 energy-related projects. We do have another program already mentioned here previously, the Pro Energy. It's been in the news lately, financed by the World Bank, being implemented by FUNAE. Type of support
a toda a
well,
população de Moçambique, tanto
its
nas
goal
zonas
is to
periurbanas como nas
increase
zonas
access to
rurais.
electricity in
Esse
all
programa
Mozambique,
abrange
in urban
ambas
and
as
rural areas. So all
apoio
types of
para o
technologies
caso
here,
passa
it's
por
type of support
intervenção e assistência
when it comes
técnica,
to mini grids. We're
enquanto
talking
no
about
caso
grants and
dos
technical
standards,
assistance,
pequenas cargas
domestic solar
financeiras,
systems, only
dando
financial
apoio à
support
manutenção e result-based financing.
in the type
As
of
províncias
grant.
que
Provinces
criadas em
covered,
Niassa, Nampula, Zabéia,
talking
Manica,
about
Sofala,
Niassa, Nampula,
Cabo
Zambezia,
Delgado,
Manica, Sofala, and
Menezes
Cabo
e no
Delgado,
seu todo, entre
and
autarquias e supervisores
overall,
caseiros,
solar
mais
systems
de
and mini
70.000
grids, we're
novas
talking about
ligações,
more than
novos efeitos e ainda
70,000 new
apoiadas
connections,
as
and give
comunidades
support to
e as pessoas que
the
são
host communities
deslocadas devido
and
a zonas de guerra, como acontece, por exemplo, em Cabo Delgado.
and people that have to flee from war, like
Quase
in Cabo
por último,
Delgado.
mas ainda não sendo o último, também
Last
existe
but
o
not
programa
least,
Illumina,
we also have the Illumina program
neste caso apenas para
we're
sistemas solares
running in Mozambique,
caseiros,
talking
Baby,
in
solar
only
em
in Capital Delgado.
Miquelina,
It's being
e
financed by the cooperation
pela
agency in
organização de serviços
being
públicos do
implemented
Estado e a agência.
by the voluntary sector and as when you collect connections
E a divisão
in
é
these
igual
two
em cada
provinces,
para cada um.
3,000 each. Provide funds and develop and implement these type of systems in these two provinces.
Programa que quero
The last program here in Mozambique, financed by the cooperation agency in Sweden,
e o seu objetivo é apoiar o setor privado para
to support the private sector to meet the energy needs in rural areas in Africa. It counts with the support of NIASA and other partners, but it works in provinces of NIASA, Nampula, and Dominica, and it's trying to get over 120,000 new connections. I think it's important to understand these programs have different amounts allocated to each. An overview. What we're talking about here, the overall amount of, we're talking about 177 billion euros. It's a huge amount and can really make a difference in pushing this sector forward. And if you do have any questions about these programs, we'll have a reaction chat, and then we can bring forward to our guests
Muitíssimo obrigado.
during the debate.
Todas as apresentações disponíveis.
It will be available to you, to all
A AMER e
participants.
ALER estão neste momento
AMER and ALER are right now
que é documento
updating
detalhado em que todos estes programas
the renewable energies document where we do mention all of these programs.
também terão acesso a esta informação.
So everybody here will have
Publicar uma atualização
access to this information
publicada em 2021 e agora
in that we're just now just it. We're going to publish it soon. So any questions, please use the Q&A function in this platform on your right.
e nós iremos tomar todas elas de debate.
And we will try to provide answers throughout the debate. And like Rita just mentioned, all the programs mentioned here will have their own representatives throughout the Q&A session. without further ado, I would like to call to the podium, as it were, Dr. Daniel, Guilherme, actually, member of the AMER as well. He was also a legal advisor for AMER and ALER when we were drafting this regulation. Thank you so much for being here with us. The floor is yours. Thank you, Ricardo. I'd just like to start by greeting everybody here, most notably all our speakers. Let me congratulate you all. I did congratulate you first thing in the morning. Congratulate the government, congratulate ARENE and ARENE as well for this very substantial amount of work and the results achieved so far. Several speakers have mentioned this already. I also participated and contributed to this regulation on behalf of my association, and we're very pleased to see the final outcome. Substantial amount of work here from our end with very good results. Everything here is still being built. And what remains to be approved is far outweighs, I think, what has been published so far. But the standards and the principles in the decree does provide us with a very clear overview, and I think that was the goal of the government as well for off-grid access. We're not going to go into a lot of detail. This decree, I think Dr. Telma did an amazing job in introducing that decree to us, but we like to stress a couple of aspects here that the way we see it are very important. Firstly, next slide, please. Thank you. So we have here a new set of principles and standards that will provide us with some solutions, will give answer to a number of issues that were being brought forward by private entities and now are part of the regulation. So we take note that there's a lot of clarity and legal certainty when it comes to the framework, legal framework and institutional framework concerning all types of activities related to off-grid access. We also take note that there was a lot of effort put into simplifying the regulation and steering clear of the regulation foreseen by or set out by the public-private partnerships. And so we've streamlined the procedures and we've shortened the delays when it comes to implementing projects and everything that is related to communicating the projects and so on and so forth. So also we take note of a lot of clarity and transparency going through the via public procurement. This is very welcome. Very welcome. I think these follow good public procurement guidelines, practices. So now we can have a more attractive and transparent market where everybody is on the same level playing field. We can now implement projects via private sector initiatives, so unsolicited proposals, or direct awarding. But there are some restraints here, and that's good. Here, I think, however, we can still clarify a little bit when it comes to unrequested, unsolicited proposals, when they're not exactly competing requests or tenders. So we're not clear if all these proposals unsolicited, when there are no other competitors, if they give rise immediately to a public procurement procedure or not. So we think that we should look into this a little bit better. This regulation does bring about a set of procedures for competing requests. I'm not going to go into detail here. I think Dr. Telma did a great job here. It does provide some clarity when it comes to the incentive regimes, schemes. This was a question for the private sector that came up very often. We still need to overcome a couple of issues, and I think we will do that in the additional complementary regulations, and also when we update our customs code, which is happening right now. Another issue is to have in the concession contract interconnection clauses or rules. So this scheme, this interconnection scheme, is going to be better regulated in its own regulation, but the principles already set out by this regulation here are very satisfying, at least from the private investor perspective. Tariffs and the possibility of having cost-reflective tariffs that are a little bit different from universal cost tariffs. I think this is good news. Again, ALER members and all stakeholders are worried about how this regulation itself will have when it comes to this type of tariff and pricing. We also think that it's well good that the regulation is to set up rules aiming to achieve better quality control, also of the equipment itself. Next slide, please. This regulation has already been approved, regardless of the fact that the forthcoming regulation is already being prepared now. We do have a very clear roadmap for implementing this project. From the first stage, public procurement tenders from private sectors, rather, going to concession, granting, awarding, all the way to the beginning of the commercial operation. So we're not going to go into detail of all stages here, but I think what happened with this regulation here, we have now a very clear vision of what it is for all the required steps to get from A to B. So it's a very simplified, clear overview of what the steps are needed. Next slide, please. And last but not least, what we see as the biggest challenges, also mentioned by the previous speakers. So, bringing this to an end, bringing this forward, and improving this at a timely manner when it comes to the additional regulation. It's very important. We do have a great deal of clarity in terms of principles of this resolution. We need more. So, a good and fast implementation of this is key. Is key. I think we lost the speaker now. We can't seem to hear the speaker, unfortunately.
Acho que perdemos momentaneamente, mas,
Yeah, I think we lost your connection here.
mas muito obrigado. Eu acho que passávamos então, já estava no final. Obrigado por esta análise.
Well, thank you very much. I think you were there right on almost close to any presentation. Yes, Ricardo, we just lost you. I think you are on mute, probably. Can't hear you right now. No, not yet. Still can't hear you. No microphone for the speaker. Yes, we can hear you. Yes, thank you very much. So, from our side here, several positive aspects here in this presentation, again, at this point, and I think it's good to take this opportunity to broach other aspects of forthcoming ones that are going to really help with the regulations. So, thank you again for your excellent presentation. I'd like to give the floor to my senior consultant to get you guys up. I'm Mark.
Hi, Ricardo. Important pieces of legislation that we've been anticipating for a while. So let me just allow me a quick few words on GET.invest, who organizing this event together with ALER, and on how we actually think we can support developers who are interested in the optical sector in Mozambique. We go to the first slide. You see, so GET.invest is a technical assistance platform sponsored by the European Commission, also Germany, Sweden, Austria, the Netherlands. We offer advice to developers on how to structure your renewable projects and how to develop financial models and investor communication. And above all, we help to match entrepreneurs and investors in the public, private, corporate investors, including some of those facilities that are also presented earlier by Rita. We have a funding database. We have access to our project documentary that can carry out studies for you, like environmental studies or legal studies that might all this free of charge to the developer. If you look at the next slide, the sectors that we support are on-grid, off-grid, as well as some other adjacent sectors. Off-grid does indeed represent about 2/3 of our current portfolio, including solar home system, including mini-grids. The way it works with applications, currently, let's say like about 20% of applications that we receive are being accepted. Some examples of projects we have supported. On the next slide, we look at a successful solar program company in Mozambique. So we helped to restructure their business and to design a financial model. We helped to obtain some medium-term debt facilities for this company of 3.5 million euros. And now we are in the process of supporting the fundraising around EV. So I think this is a quite nice example of how a solar play will really make a difference for last mile customers, and about the important financing mechanism as well of receivable finance that these sectors is heading towards. If we go maybe to the next slide, and giving an example of a mini-grid company that we have supported in neighboring Lesotho. This is actually one of the largest mini-grid transactions ever to be completed in Sub-Saharan Africa. That's very big financial close. I think it's a good example of how the sector moves forward by bundling a portfolio of mini-grids rather than maybe just aiming at a single project and really make use of economies of scale. This, of course, has also for support and for with regards to the financial model. So this was a complex endeavor. We really had to design a financial model that would take into account how many areas of mini-grid portfolio. We basically want the investors here in Electrify as well as RERD to split the equity as well as the senior debt offices on this project. So I think if you compare this very recent success with the situation now in Mozambique, I think we are even now facing this legislation a step ahead. In Lesotho, when power started, there was actually no regulatory framework whatsoever for mini-grids, so it really all had to be designed from scratch, and we had to kind of look for a new legislation. So I think there's quite a lot of learning points that we all took away with the process, and that might also be useful now when we are in Mozambique when it comes to how things like I worded. There might be a regulatory framework, but from what I heard, or also from Dr. Guilherme, there's still a bit of ambiguity and again, maybe in terms of how exactly unsolicited project might move ahead, and there might be some updates in some code. So examples here, if you look at the licenses, the concessions that were worded for this project, there has been a bit of breakdowns when it comes to practices. So when you find terms like the tariff can be increased in consultation with the industry, things like that. What does that actually mean? How does this work? How who consultates, who suggests, who decides, or maybe some other legal terms that to look out for things like where it's like a reasonable let's say, for example, when the grid arrives, as it was mentioned in the concession here, so like when the grid arrives, the utility gives a reasonable warning to the operator. What is reasonable? What is a warning? How exactly will this work out in practice? So there is a lot of things happening in practice that we're able to be defined and see how really this law can be in practice. So if you look at the next slide, put together like a few points of really lessons learned. I think that we would be very happy also to discuss to act as a soundboard or to develop policy when they develop our business plans. So one thing maybe I want to point out here, very clear that mini-grids do not have that much in common really with IPP projects. There's lots coming from the IP background and trying to do mini grids, and it's really a very different kind of sector, and actually also has led to quite a lot of struggle. When it comes to the financing techniques that are being used. So often you see that financiers and developers, they're kind of using the project financing tools that they know. And we think after the year we had so many grids that not always maybe the right. So you have an IPPs, for example, and an EPC contract that has liquidated damages, that has or delays. Does all this really make that much sense in the mini grid of that sector? So why would you insist on liquidated damages? No, for instance, like that, and there is no really delay costs or the final contract. Just like to give some examples. A big point of discussion, obviously, the tariff. Now in the legislation, we have the ability to go low cost effective tariffs, as it is worded. However, in reality, we will see cost effective tariffs are very far from what you see in the market. Is actually the tariff that we more geared towards the ability to pay in the market. And that again is very different to the tariff that is maybe that is kind of the national tariff that is being used in the country. So, for example, in Lesotho, you could see like a cost coverage tariff would maybe be in the range of 9-10 rand. So that's something that anybody would be able to pay. On the other hand, you have a national tariff that's more in the range of 2 rand, which is very far from the cost covering. So probably opting somewhere in the middle, and see where this is going. See who is really going to be able to take this on, who's going to be able to pay, and how these projects will develop. And that's clear is that you probably would take these kind of projects with a point of view of flexibility as well. So it's not really that suited often for project time, because there might be an argument to take more as a corporate finance kind of project. So give some money to a developer and then develop the project, see how it goes, and then expand. They put in more panels once they are needed, and rather than doing this as a very close deal like IPP, and in all this also take into account that legal costs or contracting and then will push up the cost of these projects significantly, as we have seen in the past. So you have to keep everything very cost effective as well. Okay, if you look at the next slide, it's very clear you come that. So this is kind of systematic. I like from the Bloomberg presentation actually that they did on the mini grid parasites. Without going into every point, it shows very well that the canvas of the different areas that you have to pay together to make this mini grid successful. Not only one element we have now, which is on the left side, now that we have a regulatory framework for place, but we also need the financial sector, and we need the financial mediation to come along to provide the appropriate instruments for this. So it is a very mini grid with a very complex and very hard to finance sector. There's no doubt about it. So we need to be simple as possible. So the demand on the regulator, the electricity sector, we like to keep it simple, don't go over burden which is maybe for local companies and all this difficult licensing or land acquisition and things like that. Really try to keep things very simple. And on the side of financing, try to really provide kind of financing that is needed for this particular sector, maybe asset securitization, maybe refinancing stages, all these kind of things will need to be discussed. And now the next slide shows you basically our link to where you can on board. So you apply to our website, and the process is very simple. It's the guided process. You get feedback usually within 3 to 4 weeks. And I think I would like to hand back to Ricardo now to open the door for our discussion.
Marcus, thank you very much for your insightful presentation and for that benchmark, which I think is so important that we look at the neighboring countries, we look at what's happening in the region, and we realize and we take some lessons from it. If I may, just to break a little bit of the protocol here before we jump into the debate session, and maybe ask you, because I think you've touched on something very, very, very important, and I see that there's a lot of questions coming already from the public, and I think we'll touch that, and I will try and cover that as well as possible. But I think you've touched on something very interesting, which is this new regulation brings in the notion of not willingness to pay, but ability to pay. So, what is the ability of the population or the customers or the customer base within where these migrants are going to be deployed, versus what we know in reality are the tariffs, the cost, like tariffs that a private investor or private operator will define as attractive enough for them to venture into this business. So as you stand in almost this advisory role, and where you see a lot of this, how do we strike that balance? How do you see, and maybe you can touch a little bit, and I know you've touched on the support, but how do we then strike that balance between what is needed in reality at companies, but on the other hand, this regulatory notion that we have that where tariffs need to be reflective of the ability that people have.
Yeah, I think this is one of the key items, of making this kind of projects successful. And I don't have, obviously, and I don't think anyone really has the answer to that. So I think maybe the best approach probably to approach this in a way, kind of humble way of trying out things and trying to see what works in practice. So I could imagine, for example, similar maybe to what one power is doing, is also to obviously to go somewhere, start with the tariff that is close to where you found out in your socioeconomic studies the ability to pay basis, and see how much really in practice going to take you on, or who's really gonna connect. So if you, as I did it with the pilot originally, you could see quite quickly after a while that the offtake was not as high as expected. So it was really difficult for you that we what I mentioned. So what it did is like you have that flexible and started maybe with lesser connections, and the same thing maybe you can also do with tariff. And maybe you start with a certain tariff, and see also how if this market chance to develop something which I think is known as demand stimulation in the sector. So and maybe after a few years we adapt it again and once you see that electricity really has become an item in this area and in this village, and it's made a difference. Appliances are coming in and then adapt it again, maybe put more solar panels, adapt the tariff again, and that way try to keep this whole business also sustainable, rather than making everything from scratch plan. And this is the whole thing. This is what it's going to be for the next 5 years. Spend a lot of money and then to be on provinces.
Good. Thank you. And apologies for putting you on the spot. I think I started off with the most difficult question. What is how do we solve? But thank you so much. I think you're it's an honest answer, and I think it's a very structured answer, which definitely is the way we follow, right? And I think as you mentioned, demand activation is definitely something that we need to do. We need to. There's no answers. There's not an all-knowing God between that will have the answers for all this. So it's really about how do we try, how do we best and effectively try these things out and adapt. Yeah. And so thank you very much.
Yeah, I think it's really important that everyone involved, financiers, developers, also approaches with this kind of like philosophy. It's I mean, you must say this is not the kind of easy thing where you can expect a major return for everybody involved. There is a very large amount of ramp time needed in every project that we have seen. If at all, well, there might be some player here that can be somehow play a layer of not being completely like concession or such, but not everyone. So I think that's a very realistic way to do it.
Thank you. Once again, thank you very much for your presentation. So I will pass now on to me apresentando e peço desculpa também a interpretação de estar constantemente a mudar, provavelmente também a dificultar-nos a vida. Vamos então.
It does. So now let's launch into the debate. There are several questions in the chat. I promise we'll get there very quickly. I'm fully aware of the fact that we have no longer than 30 minutes. So we have 30 minutes for the debate. And to answer all the questions in the chat and the questions that come in from our audience. So right now I'd like to give each speaker a chance to give us a feedback on this translation and how it impacts their programs. So I'd like to invite Fátima Arthur, an advisor, a policy and research advisor for SRV within the BRILHO program. Fátima, thank you for being here. The BRILHO was a major driver behind this regulation we're discussing today. So I'd like to ask what may, from your perspective, what the main impact this regulation will have on your program and also on companies supported by the program. I'd like to frame things here a bit. This started with an initiative called the pilot blocks. There was structure along around regulations of this energy sector in Mozambique is a young sector, and it needs to mature. This helped us conclude regulations in such a short period of time. This regulation identifies and turns the off-grid electrification solution into something legally acknowledged and legally regulated. So off-grid is now becoming more and more important in achieving universal coverage in Mozambique. The private sector is also identified as a partner, as an active part as well in electrifying the national territory. And the private operator has rights but also duties. So now it's our moment to see how the private sector plays its role, plays a part in something that is so crucially centralized usually, as is the supply of electrical power. This first must be complemented by a number of legal instruments in order to become operational. We're ready to support the men with ARENE and FUNAE and their companies. Look at this regulation as the first step, because some questions are yet to be answered. I'd like to stop here, Ricardo, because I know you have other speakers on your list. Thank you very much, Fátima. This touches on many aspects. This change, this modernization, the private sector is not just a benefit, it's a partner. And the partner must play its role. I agree with you. It's important to see in this regulation that there are rights, yes, but there are duties, and the duties are very important. Thank you for your words. I imagine Fátima had issues with your camera, but when addressing Mark, I'm going to ask him to please turn his camera on. Mark is the intervention manager for rural development for the private sector for NFL. And he's the representative for renewable RERD, the Renewable Energy for Rural Development Phase 2. Mark, thank you very much for here. So what I'd like to ask is, well, this program, as we saw in the presentation, this program is a major partner to FUNAE, and it supports FUNAE in implementing, installing the mini grids. What I'd like to know is, Mark, your program, together with FUNAE, you're already in the implementation stage. You're already building 5 mini grids. Can you please share with us how this new regulation can bring opportunities and challenges for these mini grids that are now being implemented? Good morning, everyone. First of all, I'd like to make clear that Belgium's commitment to FUNAE and Mozambique is 5 mini-grids. We don't expect more than this for now. We don't know what the program will bring, but it is clear that these 5 mini-grids that we're developing will be owned by FUNAE. I hope that this new regulation will allow FUNAE to investigate the management of these assets and how they can be outsourced. It's possible to find alternative agreements, maybe include mini-grids. This is a very young sector, it has been said, but we need to look into this in our project. We must launch this into this discussion with FUNAE, and that's all. This is where you see that a lack of regulation is a lack of regulation can really throw a spanner in the works. Now I'd like to ask a question directly to Marja Laxo. She's here representing the BGFA, Beyond the Grid Fund for Africa. Thank you for being here with us. BGFA. It's operative in the solar, home solar systems and mini-grids. So section 1 focusing on mini-grids, section 2 focusing on energy services. I'm largely looking at these home solar systems. From your end, from the end of BGFA, how do you see this new regulation and the approval of this regulation? And what impact does it have on your project?
We can't hear you. I think your mic is on mute, Maria. Maybe you can just test it out real quick. Can't hear you right now. Still on mute. Nothing yet. Yes. Thank you, Marja.
Thank you very much. Take it away.
Yes, so we do have focus on mini-grids and solar systems, that's correct. Our primary focus is on mini-grids. And the solar systems come into picture as a complementary solutions within concession areas focused on mini-grid applications. So we started the program focus from actually we wanted to promote mini-grid electrification and decided it would be good to complement that with solar system connections for households that may not be possible to be connected to the mini-grids. And when it comes to regulation, we absolutely welcome the regulation with a lot of excitement, because we've been waiting for this for a long time. As the GFA, we could not have implemented the mini-grid funding window without this regulation, since we are really fully focused on fully private sector owned and operated mini-grids, and deployment of that kind of approach. So that becomes possible with this new regulation. So that is very well by us. There are some uncertainties related to the more detailed regulations, including tariffs and local content and so forth. But we're working closely with ARENE and FUNAE on including aspects in our closed loop guidelines, and the work is underway. It's encouraging to see that the government is welcoming increased role for the private sector. It sees the opportunity for increased international finance coming into this sector, and it really has a lot to offer, I believe. We've seen similar change in other countries of the GFA, and I think it's really a good development with the country. There's a lot of other regulation that will be tested and figured out in more detail in the years, and BGFA's program is really also committed to working with the government to figure out sort of refinement of the regulation, including tariffs. We would like to tear that down on the sites that we're implementing in the first place, and try to understand what the sort of proper ways of setting for tariff settings and how to implement in a way that is beneficial for both parties. So I think we are strong on trying to foster all the relationships between different stakeholders and finding a balance between private sector realities of implementing commercial operations and electrifying in a manner that is socially inclusive. So this is our goal at the moment. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Marjan. And it's super important that you've mentioned social inclusiveness. And as we've seen also in the regulation, there is also this notion of engaging with and public consultation, so engaging with all of these stakeholders. So thank you very much for that.
Thank you.
I will pass on to Stefan Baita. Stefan Stefan é gestor de portfólio do setor de energia na África Austral, do Banco de Desenvolvimento KfW em Frankfurt, e o Stefan aqui representa Green People's Energy for Africa de Mozambique.
Green People for Energy for Africa, for Energy in Africa. Stefan, welcome. I'll ask the question in English.
That you be brief in your reply, because it's not a super easy question, so we could stay here for a long time. But Stefan, having worked and having had the opportunity to work on this on-grid projects such as GET Mozambique, and we've seen how this change in the regulation of being more structured, pushing for the competitiveness has helped that sector, and we've seen that, and soon we'll see GET Mozambique also being implemented. With the eye now of GPE, what is your impression that this new regulation will bring to the off-grid sector?
Thank you, Ricardo. Can you hear me?
Perfectly.
Perfect. So like Maya, we believe that the new regulation really provides a lot of helpful guidance for any private sector investment in the off-grid sector. I would like to mention especially the strengthened role of ARENE as a regulator. ARENE will not only decide over tariffs, but also is supposed to create an off-grid cadastre and decides also on what happens when the grid comes. These are all very crucial elements here. Also, the provision of compensation in case the grid comes is mentioned in the regulation, which is also a very valuable element. We welcome also the clear commitment to a cost covering consumer tariff, and also the commitment to make above all or even entirely use of renewable generation sources. And also the commitment that concessions are to be awarded through competitive tendering is also we highly welcome here. There are still some clarifications that are needed. I would like to mention three. The first one is that the document, the regulation is not mentioning FUNAE and EDM at all as institutions. It would be helpful in such a regulation that these two institutions, which have very different roles here, that the definition of their roles is also described in such a document. Then also one point which seems not to be clarified is whether the state must hold shares in an off-grid project, or whether it can also be 100% private concession. And last but not least, we are talking about an off-grid regulation, but what is off-grid and what is on-grid in Mozambique? Who decides on this? How is this defined? Any grid extension, in my point of view, should be a transparent planning process. And should be binding for all parties involved, and like this guaranteeing planning security for all actors in the sector. In the best case, that would be very helpful, I think, for all of our programs. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Stefan. And I think it's, as we say, it's not all roses. There's a lot of progress been done, but there's still a long way to go. And I think you've mentioned some of the topics which are extremely important, and that so that we ensure that this regulation does indeed contribute to a healthy sector. I will pass on now to Gervásio Maveng. Gervásio é assessor técnico do Energizing Development, ENDEV, e do GPI. Bem-vindo, Gervásio. Obrigado por estar aqui conosco. A pergunta que eu tenho para o Gervásio é, sendo o ENDEV...
ENDEV is one of the biggest programs when it comes to supporting the clean kitchen programs and other domestic solar system programs. How does this regulation impact your projects? I think you assessed this already on your end. How will it impact everything you do? Thank you very much, Ricardo. Welcome, and thank you, everybody, and greetings to all speakers and all attendees. I think it will impact in different forms, but I'd just like to point out that in that we benefit more than 2 million people. The clean kitchen and the domestic solar systems, as mentioned here, and we do have an RBF fund created in 2019, touching more than 600,000 people. When it comes to this regulation, the fact that we have a regulation for the energy access and off-grid, we will have a fairer level playing field. It would be key to achieve the 2030 goals. it's also key to attract more private sector investments. When it comes to companies that we support, companies that operate off-grid, we do have to register, as the decree points out. It's going to be difficult. I think it won't be that challenging for some companies, because they have been meeting these type of requirements similar type of requirements from EDF, especially because we have vast amounts of experience in the area, and so we don't see this as being a huge problem. So companies will be able to provide that type of information, that register. I'd also like to point out that we will have to have a debate about data production from the part of companies. That's a key component here for us. So I think we should have a mechanism of incentives, tax incentives or financial incentives, so that companies can meet the requirements. Because collecting and sharing data, that will represent for sure an additional investment, an additional cost for companies. Thank you. Thank you, Ricardo. Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for your answer, Gervasi. I think you do point out a very important issue here. Sound is breaking up, unfortunately. Companies do have to meet some requirements, and that will maybe imply some additional costs. And Dev and Fraser, so good, so that they can share their databases and all that, and all past projects. But at what cost? That is the question here. In order for us to make sure that all companies will be able to follow the recommendations that are now legal recommendations. Thank you very much for your answer. I'm a bit torn apart here, because I know that we have several questions, and I really like to thank you for your questions. I think a lot of those questions have been answered already, and thank you, FUNAE, for doing that in our chat. There are a couple of questions here directed towards ARENE, so hopefully I will take this opportunity to redirect one of those questions to ARENE. I know that I promised you to hear the national direction for energy, and let's see if we can make that happen still. But I think that this stage, this part of our event now, the questions and the answers, this is one of the most important parts of the webinar here. Not disregarding our presentations, of course, but for us associations, this is really the opportunity we have here to talk. It's important for everybody, for those who are following us online, and for all the private partners and institutions that are following us here. So, Dr. Telma, here with the first question and an explanation request about the legal framework, the regulatory framework. Letter A, most notably, licensing. What are the stages that need to be met when it comes to the domestic systems to be connected to the mini grid? If you do mention that there are companies that have their rights preserved notwithstanding or without prejudice of what's going to happen. So if anybody wants, what do they have to do if they want to have technical or financial assistance? It's a multi-layered question. Let me break it down. And let's talk about first about Article 21 and the granting and awarding system, and then I'll follow up with the additional questions. Please, Dr. Telma. If the speaker, yes. Thank you very much. Thank you, Ricardo. Is it the Article 22 interconnection? That is right. Just like we said previously in our presentation, the regulation sets out the general guidelines, general principles, when compensation reimbursement happens or not. As it is regulated right now, we will have a specific regulation on interconnection, and it will feature an interconnection contract, a template, and other procedures that will make sure that what's set out here, generically speaking, will then be implemented specifically. And one of the previous speakers, as did mention the importance of having this interconnection clauses in the contract itself to give more certainty to the ambassador as well. So we have here the rules about the interconnection. I think the participant who asked the question is probably well acquainted with the article. We don't have time to go into the nitty-gritty here, but these are the general rules. All types of contracts, all elements that need to be approved. And I think it's worth repeating, even though it can be a little bit boring sometimes or repetitive, but we have the general principles here. We're now setting everything up. And because we're still setting everything up, we're not at the stage where you can go into the nitty-gritty, into all the details. So that's it from my end. Thank you, Ricardo. Thank you very much. We do have some other follow-up questions. You did mention the off-the-grid electrification plan. Is this plan ongoing? If it does exist, how do we get access to it? The plan is being set out. The decree sets out the approval of the regulation, and then this plan will be approved at the Council of Ministers. Why? Because we need to make sure that these type of interests are taken care of. So when the grid is here, what will happen next? We need to have a plan. Because without a plan, we won't have an effective and efficient implementation. So we need to identify all the areas, but also need to bear in mind everything that's set out in the plan as to avoid conflicts, potential conflicts. So the plan is being drafted. I think it's in a later stage of drafting, really. I can't really give you details of how further out we are, but it's going to be a key step to this. So individual requests or public procurement procedures will have to bear this in mind. Thank you. Thank you so much. I think that's crystal clear now. And Dr. Telma, seeing that we have the questions here, low-hanging fruit, as it were, we'll just make the most and ask you the questions. When and who will commercially operate these products? And if they're not sanctioned by ARENE, will there be penalties? will there be a public list? But for ARENE specifically, when, for those who are commercially operating commercially these commercial products, when do they have to be certified by ARENE, and what penalties, what type of penalties are we talking about if they're not? Now, we can all read in the regulation, and the regulation is now in force. To that question, we need some instruments still, and one of them is the regulation on the quality standards. Safety and rather technical and safety standards. And then it will lay out all the certification requirements so that anything that's sold by an operator, north, south, center in Mozambique, will follow the same guidelines, the same standards. It's important. Why? It's important to guarantee quality so that energy will get to the consumer in a reliable and in a reliable manner and with good quality. We know that energy services, energy systems have a key role to provide energy for off-grid areas. So that energy that will get to all Mozambicans has to be a quality energy. It has to be quality, high quality. So we did put forward a benchmark exercise. And also another important aspect is the environmental issue. Discharging this type of equipment, getting rid of the equipment, it has to follow environmental guidelines and standards. Because we don't want to have a problem. We don't want other sectors to have a problem with this. So as I said, this is still being set out and in preparation. Rather, let me just add something here. The regulation does point out that everything that's in place already needs to strive towards getting to fulfilling and meeting the standards and new standards and requirements. Thank you. Can you hear me, Dr. Telma? Can you hear me all right? Yes, loud and clear. Loud and clear. Thank you very much. You did point out and mention this very important question. How will the systems contribute to all the electrification and the environmental issue as well? So discharging refuse and batteries and the whole environmental issue. The last question for ARENE before we move on to other participants. There's a couple of issues here. What's the connection between the plan and the roadmap? Maybe just clear things up here. I think the plan is very clear, approved at the Council of Ministers, and then we'll have a very clear structure of how it will grow off-grid, but maybe the roadmap, Dr. Telma. Maybe I'll give the floor to Isália from FUNAE to take the floor here, because that's something that FUNAE is working on directly, specifically. Thank you very much. Dr. Isália, maybe you can provide some clearance here, some clarification. Thank you, Dr. Telma. in-grid and off-grid areas. I think we need to have some clarity here because of these definitions. So that's why the roadmap is ongoing. We want to identify clear-cut methodologies to have clear-cut definitions. We do have our national electricity company, and so with this roadmap, we want to have a breakdown of the areas that are going to have off-grid product or implementation. Because we have mini grids and we also have domestic solar systems. So if we look at the technical requirements for mini grids, most often than not, we cannot open a mini grid in certain areas. So that's when domestic solar systems are really important to guarantee, to make sure that that complementarity exists. So we're going to look at hybrid solutions, as it were. Sometimes we have mini grids and complemented by domestic solar systems, bearing in mind the capacity and the needs of the set local or area. Because we can only have mini grids if there are enough people to be connected to the mini grid, obviously. So, like Dr. Thomas said, that's the roadmap. The roadmap is the basis for the electrification plan that will be later approved, following all the procedures, the administrative procedures, necessary, because the electrification plan is something that covers the whole country. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. I think everything was very clear, but I have a follow-up question. There are several stages. There's the tender. There are two aspects. There's a tender, or you can have someone making an application. What is, in the second case, what is the role of FUNAE? Because they're the ones who coordinate the off-grid projects. Thank you so much, Ricardo. It's important not to forget that we don't have two approaches. The role of the regulation is to regulate the off-grid actions. When these initiatives are open to a prerogative set out by the regulation, there's a cycle. There's implementing stages. FUNAE, coordinating off-grid electrification, will receive the applications, but we are to ensure that all laws are applied in the same way. What we want to do with these tools is to find homogeneous approaches. So if the private sector has something that is eligible under the terms of the regulation, then we have to have a procedure that follows the regulations. When it comes to the licenses, there are licenses in several locations. Some concessions, some licenses cover 2 provinces. And the one guiding this activity will be the regulation. each situation has an ad hoc approach specific to that situation, and the application will need to present the application, and then it will be analyzed. But I'd like to stress that all analysis and all assessment will be done pursuant to the tools that have been approved or are being approved or are being drafted under the framework of this electrification of the grid. I have only two more questions because before I have speech from the National Director for Energy. Question is for Dr. Telma. What's the timing for any additional regulations when it comes to interconnection? But basically, we know that there will be other regulations, and I'd like to know when. When will they be approved? Thank you, Ricardo. In the scope of these regulations, we have some elements. As I said, we have begun preparing we're hoping to have most things approved by the next semester, in the next semester. We want to have everything assessed, but not leave anything out. I can't say a specific month, but soon enough, in the next month. Telma, Isália, please comment on what I'm going to say now. Isabella is a representative of the European Union. They talked about support options. It's important to have the energy come at a low cost. There are matching funds and other grants, and this is part of the solutions. And RBF have been important to finance the tariffs that are very important at this stage. And this is very important. ARENE, FUNAE, and the donors are in line, and they're aware of all the concerns. Telma and Isália, please feel free to comment. Thank you, Ricardo. As for the RBFs, what we're looking at now within the existing framework when it comes to charting, when the private sector wants to develop an initiative, they will need a cushion or a buffer to carry out their activities. The RBFs should look at this. They look at a type of compensation and analyze the challenges and the steps that it takes to get there. There are connectivity issues are important. So all these issues are not locked down yet, they're not locked in, they're still being assessed. They need to be deepened. The penalties of defining action plans or the investments that are not adjusted to the places they're supposed to be installed in. So we need now a way to find a timeline to find the best methodologies. Not that some are right and others wrong. We just try to find the most appropriate ones. We have to start somewhere. We need to take steps. Some are right, some will be, well, less so. And when it comes to these incentives, there are already some experiments undergoing, and they're improved, but they're improving, the results are improving. As the challenges arise, we cannot forget these issues that are the prerequisites. So I think this is all on my part. Thank you, Ricardo. Well, it's true with the private sector sometimes pressures to get the immediate solutions, but you've highlighted the need to take the right steps rather than the quickest steps. I'm fully aware that we've gone beyond our allotted time, and we still have more than 100 participants with us. Thank you so much for being here with us. I think this reflects upon the relevance of this debate and of how interesting it's been. So thank you, all the speakers. Thank you, all participants. Thank you, everyone who's asked questions. Now it's my pleasure to invite the Deputy Director of the Ministry of Energy, Miquelina Matavel. Thank you for being here with us. Please, go ahead. Thank you, Ricardo. Good afternoon, everyone. Start to begin by apologizing for not being able to be here before in the beginning as foreseen, but I had technical issues. I could hear you, but I couldn't connect the microphone in order to speak, so my apologies. So I'd like to greet everyone. I'd like to say that the access to energy is a right of each citizen of Mozambique, and it's one of the SDGs, goal number 7. It's one of the key elements for the expansion of infrastructure and improvement of technology and the supply of modern and sustainable energy in developing countries as per the support programs in 2030. When it comes to the solutions, when it comes to universal access to power, we'd like to stress that on a national scale, regional and international scale, we've seen an evolution and technological and financing innovation for supplying clean and efficient energies to communities in a situation of energy poverty. And this may help reach the national targets for electrification in areas that are still off-grid. Decentralized technologies, off-grid technologies, resorting to local renewable energies, namely mini hydro plants and residential solar power, mini grids, small wind generators, etc. And now the result of the evolution of technology can serve rural communities, especially those located far from the main access to the national power grid. It's in this context that the 5-year plan for the government, 2019-2024, foresees electrifying all the regional governmental bodies. Until 2024, all the regional power headquarters will be electrified, and to this end, we will count on on and off-grid electrification. He's been working very hard in order to meet these targets. And I'd also like to say that in order to have a universal access to energy, we have committed efforts to adjust the regulatory framework in order to attract more investment and promote the development of renewable energies, as well as energy sector in general. So we launched the procedure to review the electricity regulation. It's been approved by the Council of Ministers, and now it's awaiting approval by the Parliament. I think we're all aware of these developments. We also, at a very important moment, the regulation for access to off-grid areas. We had presentations by ARENE and FUNAE, and we've been discussing talking about the participation of the private sector, and we've seen a lot of commitment from all sides, and it's easy to see that there's a lot of interest in this area. closing, I'd like to say that we, the government, are very committed to all these instruments being prepared in order to ensure that there is investment in initiatives, off-grid initiatives. And we know we cannot have universal access if we only use the national grid. So we need to be innovative to make room for the off-grid solutions, because we will need these solutions in order to meet our target of universal access. As said by ARENE, there are several other instruments. They're being prepared, and in due time, we'll share them with you, with all parties. And in closing, I'd like to thank all the support provided by the European Union. I'd like to thank German cooperation. I'd also like to thank ALER and AMER for holding this event to study and debate and talk amongst ourselves and to present this instrument. Thank you so much for your attention, and have a good afternoon. Thank you very, very much. Mr. Deputy Director, thank you for your words that guide us. Again, we apologize for all technical issues, but at the end of the day, the important thing is that you were able to talk to us. We're exactly 20 minutes late. So if I could ask Isabel Cancela de Abreu, Executive Director of ALER. Isabel, I know you were in the background, making sure that everything went smoothly. And so now you have the stage to close this webinar. Thank you, Ricardo. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, all of you who were with us despite the delay. I'd especially like to thank Miquelina Matavel, who was with us for the duration of this webinar in order to speak at the end. And it's always very relevant to count on Miriam and their support that highlight the commitment of the government of Mozambique. I don't want to speak too long. I'd like to just summarize what was said. And I'd also like to share with you what ALER and AMER will commit to. The first message that I have to you is that off-grid electrification poses a huge challenge. %30 of this electrification by 2030 will be off-grid. Right now, we think it's about 5 to 10%. So we'll have to triple at least what we have in a few years. And this will be a major challenge and shows the importance of this type of solution. Another topic is the importance of the private sector. The government is trying very hard. Private partners are also trying hard. And we've seen there's a lot of programs. I'd like to highlight two. BRILHO, they've provided brilliant technical assistance to ARENE, but also GET.invest, they provide amazing support to several associations. Without GET.invest, neither ALER nor AMER could conduct all these activities of knowledge sharing. But this is not enough, and the EU representative has said that we're doing what we can, but the private sector also has to do its part. So that is another message. The private sector is called upon, and the government is opening up the sector to the private sector. That's why it was so important to have the regulation approved and come into force. So this is all very positive. Guilherme shared with you our legal analysis, including the roadmap, where we have an idea of this process. And we've had very positive signs. However, we now need to conclude this procedure, so we need to publish all the other sub-regulations, like Telma said. In the second half of this year, let's hope this is not too long, so in a few months we'll have some news. Right now we need to clarify all the rules. So we need not only these regulations, but we need the approval of the electrification plan, and we need to review the customs code, the customs tariffs, because of the home solar systems. After doing this framework, presenting this framework, I would like to say that in name of AMER and ALER, we'll be monitoring this procedure, and you can count on us. And we'll do three things. We'll talk to ARENE, and we'll send them our opinion, our position on this. So if you have not provided us with your solutions, with your ideas of the content of these, what the content of these regulations should be, if you haven't done so already, please send them to us and we'll give them to ARENE. Once the regulations are published, we will update our roadmap that was presented by Guilherme. We will organize yet another work group, ALER AMER, to analyze the electrification roadbook. Like Isália from FUNAE said, this has been presented. It's undergoing the public consultation. And in the end, we'll like to keep on working with all the support programs, collect information, and make information available. Right now, Rita's presentation will be available. She's actually telling me it's already available, so you can go to our site and download all presentations, including hers. Then we'll update the summary. Like Ricardo said, we published it last year, and we want to update it every year. So we'll collate information from other segments, not just the off-grid segment. And when we hold our next major event, please save the date in November. We'll have our major conference. We'll hope in person. And at that point, you'll have access to the updated summary. Until then, we'll be updating our publications from a sectoral perspective. And like I said, you can access them on our site. I'd like to leave you with this. And I'd like to end as I began by thanking you for being here. It was a very interesting event for us. I hope for you too. And please, you can count on us in order to follow up on these developments and ensure that in 2030, we'll all be popping the champagne and celebrating everyone's access to energy. Thank you very much.